Hello, welcome to this MagiCAD for Revit webinar. Today we're going to look at a new feature that's in the 2.19 update release 2 version, and this is the simplified and user-defined pressure drop calculations. So what this means in essence is the ability now to provide your own pressure drops to equipment, ancillaries, etc. on the ventilation system, instead of using perhaps MagiCAD's own manufacturer reference data that you'll maybe be familiar with in the graphs, and obviously being able to use your own allowances. The idea that it's called simplified is because if you just stick a notional figure in there just to get some early calculations, and obviously it's a simplified calculation as opposed to a fully designed balanced one. So let's take a look at the actual calculations themselves. So we have a very basic system here on the screen. You can see that I've got some examples there of the webinar shown on here. So you've got the MagiCAD family with the pressure drops defined by instance parameter, and what this means is, why I've defined it like that is this is actually a MagiCAD family. So we've taken it from the database, it's a manufacturer, air terminal, and if you look at properties you will see that we actually have a graph, a chart, and on there you can see a flow rate against sound and pressure data. Now the idea is that, especially in this UK market, we have many requests from designers that have said that's all very well, but at early stage all I want to do is put my own calculations, allowances in there for air terminals, VCDs or attenuators or whatever it is. So this example, I'm just going to look at air terminals, by the way, just look at all different auxiliaries, and you will find that the next one is just a non-MagiCAD family. So this is just a third-party family, as we call it, which is just some manufacturer's website. And we've just got an air terminal. So if you look at properties in MagiCAD, obviously it doesn't have any because it isn't one of ours, so there's no graph. But again, you might want to put your own data on there, of course. And what you want is a calculation to use the same value or the same parameter value for all that type of grill, or it might be you want to put an allowance for all grills at a certain pressure drop, and they're all that's all possible. So we'll go through each one in turn. So this third party one, we can just add their own instance parameter into that, like I said. And then finally we've got another family here, but this one we're not going to put the pressure drop into the parameter, and don't worry, we'll come to the parameter later. We're just going to put it into the connector within the family, and again I'll show you how to do that later. And then lastly, this is the actual calculation using MagiCAD data. So this is MagiCAD family of an air terminal, and the properties you can see there again, similar to the one I showed you before, but this one will not be overwritten, so it's going to use the MagiCAD data. So wherever the flow rate is, wherever it falls, that's the data it's going to use. So we've got like 4 different examples there of how we can now use this pressure drop. So the idea would be to choose one or a combination of these solutions to get the calculation to perform to your requirements. So what I want to look at first is just a sort of benchmark of the existing calculation for balancing. So if I go to the ventilation tab, go to balancing, this is the full calculation. This is the calculation that not only calculates a pressure drop, it also balances. And if you're unsure what balancing is, that's the recalculation of pressure throughout the system, so to highlight any fluctuations or high pressure drops and think, oh yeah, whether it's commissionable or not, whether you need dampers, because obviously a pressure drop just gives you a total pressure to an index run, but balancing then pushes the pressure back through the system and sees what happens. So for example, if I had a 500 Pascal fan here, then this actual air terminal probably wouldn't be well balanced, because the 500 pascals will just shoot down here and obviously have a huge airflow out of this grill, but you can't control that because obviously there's no damper on it, so that would be an unbalance. But the pressure drop calculation wouldn't tell you that. It would just say I want 500 pascals. So let's look at this balancing calculation. So very quickly, here's the calculation itself, and the reason it says balancing is you get these adjustment values, and if you look at the properties of these products, you can see that MagiCAD can automatically track if it's got a damper in the grill or whether it's got a VCD. So let's go down to where it's got a VCD. So you can see there in the drawing I've got the VCD, and that is obviously adjusting itself as per requirements to manage the balancing of that system. So there's no warnings I can see in this whole run, so basically my system is in balance, helped by the VCDs, and there's my index run to there. So nothing scary there, but that's because it's in balance. So the simplified pressure drop is used, I would say, most of the requests from this market is when people want to do a very early stage calculation and just want to throw some allowances in there, or that their contract isn't down to do any kind of commissioning or balancing. All they want to do is select a fan, which is a flow rate and a pressure drop at a certain value, and that's it. So that's why we've introduced this calculation now. So the simplified pressure drop, as I'm going to show you here, now has this option to do not use MagiCAD product data, and then below there you can also choose one of two options as well. So that's activated in settings, and if you go to settings, then project, you will see here that there's now a little tick box down here that says activate user-defined pressure drop overrides. So that now enables us to do this sort of simplified or user-defined pressure drop. I'll come back to this later. This edit function allows you to put your own allowances in, even if the products don't even exist in the actual project. So just looking at this first example, you'll see here this pressure drop calculation. That's a new icon in this drop-down menu. If I click on that, you will see that I can now say do not use MagiCAD data. So if I didn't check that box and just used the standard MagiCAD pressure drop calculation and the MagiCAD product data, then as I showed you before, it will look on the graph, the chart, and then use that pressure drop as is defined there. But if you want to make an allowance, you want to control it and override that data, then all you do is click on do not use MagiCAD product data, use the pressure drops as defined in the instances, and then just press OK. And if I just click on that, you will now see that there is no actual adjustment values anymore, because nothing's being balanced. It's just reporting a pressure drop. So you'll see that in the view in the background, I'll show you that the index run is still the same, and the pressure drop is still calculated the same. But what you'll start to notice now is that in these air terminals where we've done the overrides, which are these three, you'll see the first one, MagiCAD, is defined by an instance parameter. I'll show you where that is in a minute. You can see there that it says pressure drop is 18, and I can look at that, and there it is on the graph. You can see it's outside its actual range. So if it was using manufacturer data, then clearly it'd be up here somewhere about 35 or something like that. But it's not, because we said I want it to be 18. So this is the override kicking in now on that particular product. Then if we look at the third party family, again this is an instance parameter at 20 pascals that's been included in there. Now the manufacturer data didn't exist effectively, it was just almost like a dumb object. But when we used MagiCAD insertion, there's a parameter that's created, and you can use that parameter for any, so you don't have to go into the family and edit it and start adjusting things. It's already automatically taken care of as a project shared parameter for pressure drop, and it's the same parameter that all of the use, which that's what's quite nice about it. So instead of having to go into different families and different parameters for different objects and we can just use one parameter for MagiCAD, third party, your own stuff. It doesn't really matter. And I'll come to that parameter later, like I said. And then in here, this is the one that was included in the actual connector. Again, I'll show you how to edit that in a minute. And then lastly, here is the MagiCAD family here. If I right click on that and look in here, you can see that I didn't overwrite that, and that's why it's gone to the chart instead. So you can see all those in action. So now we've seen don't worry about that. Now we've seen the calculation in action. What we'll do is I'll take a look at how to edit these particular instances of pressure drop. So this one was the MagiCAD one, but we're going to overwrite it. If I click on it and look at properties, it's simply this parameter here, this given DP. You may see it as MC ventilation given DP. I've got a slightly older version of the share parameter in here, but it's the same parameter, same GUID, and you just write whatever figure you want in there, and that'll be used in the calculation. So that's really easy. And then in here, you can see that again, same parameter for the third party, given 20 pascals. This one is again the same parameter, but it's blank. So that's the key thing here, and I'm going to show you that later, how to define that in the parameter, so in the connector, sorry. So the parameter itself exists, clearly it's there, associated with air terminals, but it's blank, and that's how to activate the connector in that particular instance. And then obviously in here, there should be no given DP either, because you can see it's 0 because MagiCAD's using its own properties chart, as I've showed you before. Okay, so what we're going to look at now is how to look at the third-party family and how to add pressure drops into the connector. So if I click on that particular family and just go to Edit Family, you'll see that it opens up this terminal here, and you can see I've got a connector here. And if I click on that, this is standard Revit functionality, by the way. It is not MagiCAD functionality, so you should all have this available. It's not a bespoke MagiCAD thing at all. But the key thing in here to note is that by default, many families just have not defined. And if you have that not defined, then it's just not used. It's just grayed out, and the calculation will never use that loss method. But if you go to a coefficient, which obviously you could put a coefficient in there if you want, but if you put a loss, then you can just type a loss into that connector, and then that loss will be then translate into the project. So in this case, because all instances of this will have the same connector, and as a result the same pressure drop, then it will be identical pressure drop in every single instance of this particular type of terminal. But you could, if you wanted to, I'm not going to show you it now, but you could also click on this and associate a parameter and just find a parameter called pressure drop or something like that, and then that would then be available for editing within Revit itself. So it's just basic Revit functionality there. So if you want to have it by type, then obviously you just you type it in there or associate a parameter, and then you can do it by every instance in the actual project. So it's as simple as that to define that one there in the connector. So that's a bit of an overview of how to define your own overrides of the devices, air terminals. But also there may be an instance where you don't even want to show your air terminals yet, or don't want to model them. You don't want to model your attenuators, or you've got I don't know, a system that isn't complete. Whatever reason it is, maybe at early stage, you may want to just make some allowances. So you may want to show your terminals just to get some flows, but then not show attenuators because you haven't modeled them yet, or there's no need to show them yet, but you still want to have them in the calculation. So what you do there, if I go back to the settings and project, you will see now where I mentioned before, this edit button. If I go here, you will see that it has attenuators, louver, final attenuators. So however you want to customize that, you just click add and then just type in whatever you want in there. So this could be damper losses, and you just make an allowance for that. So I'm just going to call it 15 pascals or something. It doesn't really matter. So you can build that up, and it will save that to the project, or indeed your Revit template if you're doing it and predefining it in there. So press OK and press OK, And then now I go to the ventilation tab, and then I go to the same calculation, which is pressure drop calculation. And this time I'm going to say don't use the product data, but use this general pressure drop, the allowances we just did in settings in project tab. Press OK and click on that. And now you will find that all it does is summate the pressure drop through the ductwork system for the segments and fittings. That's all it's doing, so it's not taking into account pressure drops through any devices whatsoever. It's just how much pressure drop between that segment and the index run segment and all the fittings in between, so bends, tees, that kind of thing. And there's my pressure drop. But if I go to my general results, you can see here that actually there's my flow, there's my ducts and fittings, as I explained just now. And then all my allowances are now taken into account. There's my damper losses, the one I just defined just in the dialog box before, and you can see there's my total pressure drop. So it's quite straightforward to use. So that's a really nice early stage tool where you can just have a definition of some allowances for some equipment in an overall sort of general way, and then just calculate it against that. And press OK to update. So between those two methods, these sort of simplified overrides and general allowances, that should really help with your calculations as you transition through the design stages. Just so you might want to get an early stage quick calculation to get an air handling unit defined for pressure drop and flow rate, just so you can do some space allowances in your plant. And obviously you shouldn't have to model everything that may exist in your model to then have to calculate that. So that was the general feedback. So that's why I've introduced this for you. Okay, I just want to show you one more thing. This has cropped up a few times about using this tool and MagiCAD. This is our, if you're not aware of it, this is our content creation tool. In this example, I've just got an air terminal like this, just like a side connection planning, and this MagiCAD tool, I'm not going to explain this in this webinar, obviously, it's not for that, but those who are familiar with our content creation tool, you can create your own sort of families and family types, and you can obviously add and customize your own data. Now, when you bring this into a project, this will behave just like any other MagiCAD family, which means it will reference the performance graph that you've just inserted into here. So you may not want that, you may want it, you might not want it, as I've explained before. So if you don't want to use it, you can always use the new function now, which is obviously I'll just show you that again just to recap, which is the do not use MagiCAD product data, obviously, as well. But it may be that you just don't want to use that at all, but you just want to have no data whatsoever in here, and then you could use the connector, for instance, in that case. So you could wipe all the data out of here and just use the family connector for all those types. If you want to do something like that, you just hit clear, that'll wipe all the data out, and then you just hit save, and then when you bring that product in, it will have no product data, so it will behave like a dumb family, basically, with no performance chart behind it. So if you want to do it like that, you can. Of course, the override will work perfectly well in that situation. So you have two options with that. But I just thought I'd show that because we get quite a few queries about data from MagiCAD, and I don't want to bring it in, etc. So there you go. So I think that's it for this example of this simplified pressure drop and the overrides. Hope that was useful for you. Obviously, it's not a full training video, it's just an overview, but hopefully it can give you an idea of the capability of the software in that application. So here's some locations you can get in touch with us. There's the media channels and our websites, and for those based in the UK like myself, here's the information you need to get in touch with us here in the UK on the screen now. So thanks very much for your time today, and we'll see you on the next webinar soon. Thank you.